land. Get out. It's too late.
They're everywhere. They take our faces. It's inside of us.
Ethan, you are way of us.
The ISS Daedalus drifted in the abyss of space, a steel relic swallowed by darkness. It had been months since the crew had last seen the blue shimmer of a planetary horizon, months of isolation punctuated only by routine check-ins with mission control. But here, at the fringes of the Andromeda sector, communication delays stretched into hours, and the silence between signals felt longer each time. Commander Ethan Voss sat hunched over the primary console, eyes flicking between data streams and the endless void beyond the viewport. A seasoned officer with 20 years of deep space experience, he had learned to trust the stillness, to let the monotony become a rhythm that steadied him. But tonight, something in his gut felt wrong. He rubbed at his tired eyes, exhaling through his nose as the soft hum of the ship's systems droned on. The rest of the crew was scattered. Dr. Linnea Kessler, the mission's cryptologist, was buried in her terminal, parsing data from a recent survey. Lieutenant Anders Monroe, the engineer, had disappeared into the maintenance bay hours ago, chasing down an issue with the ship's power grid. Dr. Ray Navarro, their biologist, was somewhere in the lower decks, collecting samples from their last planetary excursion. Then it happened. The console flickered. A sharp, sudden pulse, a signal unlike anything they had encountered before. Voss sat up, pulse quickening as lines of untranslated data streamed across the monitor. The ship's automated decryption system attempted to parse the transmission, but failed. Each attempt returned a scrambled mess of symbols, repeating in an unbroken pattern. "Kessler," Voss called, his voice steady but urgent. She didn't respond at first, too deep in her work, but the shift in his tone caught her attention. She looked up, pushing a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear. "What is it?" "Incoming signal." Kessler frowned, rolling her chair toward the console. Her fingers flew across the interface as she pulled the transmission from the system's buffer, isolating it. "Not standard protocol," she muttered. "No source identification, it's just floating out here." Voss exchanged a glance with her. That was impossible. Every signal had an origin point, even the ones bouncing between relays. But this one had no traceable source. Behind them, the door to the bridge hissed open. Monroe entered, wiping sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his jumpsuit. "What's with the lights?" They flickered in the lower decks. "Unknown transmission," Kessler answered, not looking away from the screen. Monroe leaned over the console, squinting at the data. "Is it alien?" The word hung in the air, unspoken between them. Kessler chewed her lip. "I don't think so." Navarro arrived next, his expression mirroring the tension in the room. "I heard an alert. What's going on?" Voss gestured to the screen. "We just received a transmission. Encrypted. No origin point. Kessler's running it through decryption now." Navarro folded his arms. "You think it's a distress signal?" Kessler didn't answer right away. She was staring at the data stream, her brow furrowed. Then Slowly, she said, "It's structured. There's intentional patterning." "Which means," Monroe prompted. "It means someone or something made this," she replied. "This isn't cosmic radiation or a random burst. This was meant to be read." A heavy silence filled the room. "Then let's read it," Voss said. It took 20 hours. Kessler barely slept. Her fingers moved in restless, practiced motions, breaking apart layers of encryption. Occasionally, she muttered to herself, shaking her head, deleting entire sequences before starting again. The others rotated shifts, checking in every few hours. Monroe brought her coffee from the onboard synthesizer. Navarro monitored her from a distance, watching the way her eyes darkened from exhaustion. At some point, Kessler spoke without looking away from the screen. "It's human." Monroe, half asleep in his chair, straightened. "What?" Kessler exhaled. "The structure of the message, it's not alien. It's based on human cryptographic architecture, primitive but unmistakable. Someone on the other end knew we would be able to decrypt this." Voss, who had just entered the room, froze. "Are you saying it came from Earth?" Kessler shook her head. "Number, that's the thing. The encryption model is old, very old, but the patterns within it contain fragments of code we use now. It's like looking at an ancient dialect mixed with modern slang." "Meaning?" Navarro pressed. Kessler finally turned to face them, her expression unreadable. "Meaning this message wasn't sent from Earth, it was sent from the future." Monroe let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Bullshit. Explain," Voss demanded. Kessler's fingers hovered over the console. "Time dilation theories suggest that under certain conditions, gravitational anomalies, quantum entanglements, data could be transmitted across different points in time. We've never observed it in practice, but..." She gestured to the screen. "This shouldn't exist, but it does." Voss inhaled deeply, forcing his thoughts into order. "So, what does it say?" Kessler hesitated, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she read the first translated line. "Do not land on GR 781. Do not answer its call. Leave now. If you open it, it will consume you." A long silence followed. The words sat in the air like a weight, heavy and oppressive. Navarro was the first to speak. "What the hell is GR 781? Kessler pulled up the star charts, fingers moving fast. A sector map appeared, highlighting a region deep within the Andromeda perimeter. "There," she said, pointing at a dead system, marked only by a numerical identifier. Voss stared at the blinking dot. "That system has no registered planets." "Apparently it does," Kessler murmured, "and whoever sent this message didn't want us to go there." Monroe exhaled through his nose, rubbing the back of his head. "Shit. If it's a warning from the future, maybe we should listen." But even as he said it, the words rang hollow. Because humans were creatures of curiosity, and warnings only made them want to know why. The ISS Daedalus hung in orbit over GR 781, a solitary speck against the infinite dark. Beneath them, the planet stretched like a scarred corpse, a barren, frozen wasteland devoid of movement, sound, or life. No atmosphere, no signs of habitation, just endless, desolate ice under a sky that never changed. a dead place. Yet something had sent that message. Inside the ship, the tension was suffocating. The crew had gathered in the control chamber, staring at the incoming telemetry data, at the static-laden surface scans. "This is a mistake," Monroe said. "We don't know that," Voss countered. "The hell we don't," Monroe snapped, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "A message from the future telling us not to land, and now we're hovering over the one place it warned us about." He exhaled sharply. "This isn't just stupid. It's how horror stories start." "Then let's make sure it doesn't end like one," Kessler muttered, still working through the signal data, trying to extract more from the encrypted message. Navarro had been silent, but now he spoke. "I ran an environmental scan. This planet was sealed." The others turned to him. "What does that mean?" Voss asked. Navarro pointed at the readings on his display. "The entire surface is covered in a layer of compacted extraterrestrial material, almost like a cocoon. But beneath it, about 60 meters down, there's a structure. It's metallic, and it's not natural." "Alien ruins?" Kessler asked. Navarro hesitated. "That's the thing. The density profile matches our own materials. Titanium alloy, human fabrication." Silence. "You're saying people were here?" Monroe finally said. "Not just people," Navarro said grimly. "A station. And they tried to keep something inside." Voss rubbed his temples. His gut screamed at him to call off the mission. But if humans had been here before, they needed to know why. If this message had really come from the future, then someone had been alive long enough to send it. And that meant there were answers down there. They had to see. They descended in 2 teams. Voss, Kessler, and Monroe took the primary lander, while Navarro remained aboard Daedalus to monitor them from orbit. The ship's landing struts groaned as they touched down, the engines sending plumes of frozen dust spiraling into the airless void. Outside the viewport, the landscape stretched in every direction. Black ice, shattered ridges, and strange fractures that spiderwebbed across the terrain, as if something had shifted beneath the surface. Voss activated his suit comms. "Navarro, we're down. Airlock cycling now." "Copy," came the biologist's voice, tense but steady. "Be careful." The hatch depressurized. The exterior doors slid open, revealing the vast emptiness beyond. They stepped onto the ice. It was silent. No wind, no ambient sound, only the faint vibration of their boots crunching against the frozen ground. Voss kept his hand near his sidearm. It was protocol, a precaution. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. They followed the beacon from the structure Navarro had detected. It didn't take long to find. A hatch half buried in the ice. It was identical to the airlocks used in Earth's deep space research stations. Same metallic framework, same reinforced clamps. But this one was old, pitted with wear, coated in a layer of something organic, something that looked like frozen, calcified growths. Kessler knelt beside it, brushing frost away from the engraved serial number on the panel. The moment she saw it, she froze. Voss leaned over her shoulder. The numbers and letters etched into the metal were faded, but still legible. Daedalus 9. For a long moment, no one spoke. "What?" Monroe whispered. Kessler shook her head, as if trying to clear it. That's us." "No," Voss said quietly, his breath fogging inside his helmet. "It's not." He gestured at the last character in the engraving. It wasn't a Roman numeral 9, it was a 11. Daedalus 11. Their ship was Daedalus 9. This was another mission, a mission from the future. Monroe's voice was hoarse. "We shouldn't be here." The warning repeated in Voss' mind. "Leave now. If you open it, it will consume you." But it was too late. Curiosity had already taken them too far. He reached for the manual override. The moment his fingers touched the panel, something rippled through the ice. A deep, reverberating tremor, like the entire planet had just exhaled. Kessler jerked away from the hatch. "Wait, Too late." Voss twisted the release. A loud hiss escaped the airlock as the ancient seals ruptured, breaking apart in a cloud of dust and frost. The ground beneath them shuddered, cracks splintering outward from the door. For the first time in what felt like eternity, sound filled the air. A low vibration, a distant, hollow wailing that rose from the depths below. Then, from the darkness of the open hatch, something moved. It was subtle at first, a shifting wetness, something pulling itself upward, sliding over metal and ice. Kessler's breathing quickened. "We need to close it." Then the smell hit them. A wave of rotting meat and something chemical, thick and nauseating, burning through their suit filters. Monroe gagged, stumbling backward. Something crawled from the hatch, dragging itself into the dim light of their headlamps. It wasn't human, but it had been. It was stitched together, a grotesque fusion of limbs, torsos, and gaping, hollowed-out faces, their flesh melted into a single undulating mass. The thing had no eyes, no defined form, just an amalgamation of twisted, half-digested bodies, still shifting, still alive, fused in a state of eternal twitching horror. And then it screamed, a sound that shouldn't have been possible in the airless vacuum. The comms burst with static as the wailing drilled into their skulls. Monroe staggered back, eyes wide in terror. "Fuck! What is that?" Kessler scrambled for her sidearm. Get back! Get back!" But the thing was already moving. It lunged, its mass unfurling, stretching out into countless writhing tendrils that shot toward them. One of them wrapped around Monroe's leg. He screamed. Voss grabbed him, pulling hard. Too late. The tendril ripped through Monroe's suit, sinking into the flesh beneath. For a moment, Monroe's face distorted, his features rippling, as if something beneath his skin was rearranging him from the inside. His scream turned into a wet gurgle. Then he was dragged downward into the dark. Kessler fired. The rounds shredded the creature's mass, but it didn't stop moving. Voss grabbed her. "Run!" They sprinted back to the lander. Behind them, the thing slithered after them, dragging the broken pieces of Monroe's still screaming body as it followed. The hatch was open. The planet was awake. The lander's hatch slammed shut behind them. Voss and Kessler stumbled inside, gasping for breath, their suits streaked with frost and something else, something viscous that clung to the fabric in wet, writhing strands. The screams still rang in their ears, Monroe's warping into something that was no longer human as the thing swallowed him whole. The lander shuddered as the creature slammed against the exterior hull. Kessler lurched to the console, fingers flying over the launch sequence. Come on! Come on! Outside, the darkness moved. Through the viewport, the thing shifted, pulling itself free of the hatch, unfurling in the dim light. It was no longer a tangled mess of half-digested bodies. It was reassembling itself, a towering mass of limbs and flesh, human faces frozen in silent screams, their skin stretched taut over something writhing beneath. The tendrils that had taken Monroe extended outward, curling and twitching as though tasting the air, searching. The launch thrusters ignited. The lander rattled violently, kicking up a plume of ice and debris as it began its ascent. Then something lashed out. A tendril, thick and segmented like a vein, shot from the creature's body, slamming into the hull. The entire ship lurched, warning alarms blaring. "It's holding us down," Kessler screamed. Voss grabbed the emergency override, forcing the thrusters into full burn. The engines roared, struggling against the impossible weight pulling them back. Then the hull groaned, a sickening, wet creak as the tendril began to squeeze, indenting the metal like soft flesh. And then it punctured. A jagged, pulsating spike burst through the interior wall, missing Kessler's helmet by inches. It was moving, twisting toward her, searching. Voss didn't hesitate. He grabbed the emergency hatch lever and yanked it down. Explosive decompression. The air inside rushed outward, dragging everything with it. The tendril ripped free, a spray of dark fluid misting into the cabin before the hull sealed itself. The engines screamed, breaking the last of the creature's hold. The lander shot upward, leaving the thing behind. Navarro's voice cracked through the comms. "Jesus Christ, what the hell is happening down there?" Voss barely registered his own voice. "Monroe's gone. We're coming back now." The lander hurtled toward Daedalus, the ship's docking bay illuminated like a beacon against the void. Voss kept his eyes on the controls, on the docking trajectory. "Don't look down. Don't look at your hands." He could feel it. Beneath the suit, something itching. He clenched his fingers around the flight stick. No time to think about that burning sensation under his gloves. The lander latched onto Daedalus, the docking clamps sealing with a metallic clank. They made it, but something had come with them. The airlock cycled open. Navarro was waiting, his expression a mixture of relief and horror. "Where's Monroe?" Voss pushed past him. "He's dead." Kessler followed, stumbling as she moved. Navarro caught her before she collapsed. Her breath was ragged, skin pale as death beneath the sweat beading across her face. "What the hell happened down there?" Voss didn't answer. He couldn't. His hands were shaking. He could still feel the cold sweat inside his gloves, the way his skin crawled with something he couldn't name. Navarro didn't let go of Kessler. "You're burning up," he murmured. Voss turned. Kessler was shaking. Her fingers twitched, curling against the fabric of her suit as if fighting some unseen force. Her breathing hitched, her pupils dilating. Then she clawed at her helmet. "Get it off," she gasped, scraping at the seal. "Get it off." Navarro grabbed her wrists. "Linnea, stop!" she screamed, a wet, choking noise as she collapsed to her knees, convulsing. Her arms twisted unnaturally, bones shifting beneath the skin. Then her veins moved. Voss watched in frozen horror as something rippled beneath her skin, thin, thread-like tendrils, twisting beneath the surface like roots burrowing through flesh. "Oh God," Navarro whispered. Kessler's mouth opened, wider than it should. Too wide. A second row of teeth pushed up from beneath her gums, her tongue splitting like the legs of an insect. She screamed again, but the sound was wrong, wet and raw, layered with other voices. Voices that weren't hers. Voss stumbled back. Kessler! Her eyes split apart, multiplying, spreading across her face like something forcing its way out. Her body shuddered, ribs cracking outward as if something was pushing from the inside. Navarro gagged. "Oh, fuck!" And then she burst. A spray of thick, fibrous strands exploded from her chest, unfurling like the legs of a newborn spider. Navarro was too close. The strands latched onto him, yanking him forward, wrapping around his arms, his throat. His screams turned wet as the tendrils forced themselves into his mouth. Voss ran. He sealed the door behind him. His breath came ragged, his heart hammering against his ribs. The emergency lights bathed the corridor in a dull red glow, flickering as though the ship itself was shuddering in pain. Then the screams stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Voss took a shaking step forward. The comms were dead. The ship felt wrong, like something was listening. Then a sound, a wet dragging noise just beyond the door. A voice. Not Navarro's, not Kessler's, his own. "Ethan. Open the door." His blood froze. The voice was distorted, thick with wet gurgles, layered like multiple voices speaking over each other. "Ethan, we need you." A thud against the door, then another. A slow, rhythmic pounding, soft at first, then harder. More urgent, then silence. He backed away, barely breathing. And then he saw it, his glove. The fabric at his fingertips was peeling away, curling back like burnt paper. Beneath it, the skin was translucent. Something moved underneath. Voss swallowed a scream. The message had warned them. Do not land. Do not answer its call. If you open it, it will consume you. But the truth was worse. It wasn't just consuming them. It was becoming them. The ISS Daedalus drifted in deep space, silent and broken. Commander Ethan Voss stood in the ship's dim corridor, his breath ragged inside his helmet. His body ached, his limbs heavy with exhaustion. The emergency lights pulsed in slow, erratic flickers, casting long, distorted shadows along the walls. Somewhere in the darkened depths of the ship, something moved. The nightmare had followed them. Monroe was gone, swallowed. Kessler had barely made it back to the lander before it nearly took her too. They had escaped GR-781, but they hadn't left clean. The organism was here. It had come with them, and now they were changing. Voss lifted his trembling hand and slowly peeled off his glove. His skin was wrong, thin, translucent. The veins underneath bulged unnaturally, shifting like tiny writhing threads beneath the surface. His fingers felt numb, as though his body was no longer his own. He clenched his fist, trying to suppress the rising horror. Not yet. Not yet. He had to reach the comms terminal. He had to send the warning. Voss staggered forward, boots scraping against the grated floor. The air inside the ship felt thick, damp with an invisible moisture that clung to his suit. He could smell it now. That sickly sweet rot, the chemical sting of something living where it shouldn't be. He passed a viewport. For a split second, he thought he saw his reflection move differently than him. A trick of the light or something else? The ship shuddered. A distant metallic groan echoed from the lower decks. Voss swallowed. He knew what that sound meant. Kessler was still alive. Or what was left of her. She had changed first. Shortly after they escaped the planet's orbit, she had started convulsing in the cockpit, her breath coming in short, jagged gasps. Voss had unlatched her helmet, trying to help, but the moment he touched her skin, he felt it. The movement beneath her flesh, the mouthing shapes pressing against the insides of her cheeks, the small, bulging pockets shifting under her throat. Her eyes had widened in terror as she felt it too. "Ethan!" Then she screamed. Her body ruptured in an explosion of wet, fibrous mass, her skin splitting open as something else unfolded from inside her. It was still her in a grotesque, horrifying way. Her face was stretched across the thing's shifting body, eyes blinking in multiple places, her mouth half-formed, yet still speaking. It had taken her, changed her, and now she was crawling through the ship, whispering in voices that weren't hers. Voss had sealed off the lower decks, locking whatever remained of Kessler inside, but that wouldn't hold it forever. Nothing would. He reached the communications terminal. His hands shook as he keyed in the distress sequence. His fingers felt wrong, bending at unnatural angles, but he ignored it. A voice crackled through the static. "ISS Daedalus. This is Earth Command. What is your status?" Voss's throat clenched. He had to say it. He had to tell them. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again. The words felt muffled, trapped somewhere inside him, like they were slipping away before he could form them. His breath hitched, panic rising. He felt something in his throat, something coiling around his vocal cords. His reflection in the darkened screen flickered. For a split second, he saw another mouth opening inside his own. Voss slammed his fist against the terminal, forcing the words out before it could take them from him. "Do not land on GR-781. Do not answer its call. Leave now. If you open it, it will consume you. Static." Then, "Commander Voss, we're not receiving you clearly. Can you repeat?" He gritted his teeth. The ship's systems were failing. The transmission wasn't strong enough. He had to boost the signal, but that meant going to the lower decks, where Kessler was, or what was left of her. The doors to the lower decks hissed open. The air was wet, heavy with something rotting and alive. The walls glistened with a thin layer of organic material, veins of something pulsating, as if the ship itself was beginning to turn. Voss stepped forward, his breath slow, controlled. Then he heard it, a voice, his own voice. "Ethan." He turned the corner. Kessler was there, or the thing that had been Kessler. She was suspended in the dark, her body woven into the ship's walls, tendrils of flesh stretching outward like roots. Her face was still recognizable, but her eyes were wrong, black voids with tiny shifting pupils, moving independently, scanning him. Her mouth opened, revealing a second, smaller mouth inside. "It's already inside you, Ethan." He clenched his jaw. "You should let it happen." He raised his pistol. His hands shook. She smiled, or all of her mouths did. Then, in a chorus of his own voice, the walls began to whisper, You've been speaking with us this whole time." Voss fired. The round ripped through her, but there was no blood, just a wet shudder as her body twisted, splitting apart and reforming like liquid flesh. Then she lunged. Voss slammed the transmission override. The system screeched, the signal blasting outward, a final desperate transmission. He could feel Kessler behind him, her fingers stretching into thin, boneless tendrils, reaching for him. But he wasn't going to let it reach Earth. With the last of his strength, he disabled the ship's containment locks. The airlock behind him ruptured open. The vacuum of space tore through the corridor, ripping everything apart. Kessler's form collapsed inward, tendrils snapping, her many mouths screaming as she was sucked into the void. Voss felt his own body being pulled, the infection within him screaming in protest, trying to keep him alive. But he had one last choice. He let go. Cold swallowed him. His body tumbled into the abyss, the thing inside him shrieking, twisting. Then, silence. The ship drifted, lifeless. But its message had been sent. And somewhere on the other end, another ship was listening.